Hello, I hope you're doing well. Certain transactions and other changes involving an insurer can have a significant impact on that insurer, on its policyholders and other creditors, and in certain cases, on the Canadian financial system as a whole. For this reason, the ICA provides that certain transactions and other changes involving an insurer governed by the ICA are subject to the approval of the Superintendent of Financial Institution or the Minister of Finance before those changes can take place. This submodule briefly sets out the differences between these two types of approvals because the matter is relevant to the submodules that follow. So let's get started. Well, in the case of superintendent approvals, the factors considered in coming to a decision are consistent with OSFI's objects under the OSFI Act. As set out in paragraph 4 sub 2 sub A of the OSFI Act, in all cases, the superintendent takes into account whether the proposed transaction or other change will comply with the ICA. And consistent with that same paragraph, the superintendent also takes into account the impact of the proposed change on the financial position and risk profile of the insurer where applicable. In practice, the examination of the impact on financial positions is largely done via the lens of two key questions that we addressed in submodule 8A on OSFI as a prudential regulator. Those two key questions, as well as a third very important question about the impact on the risk profile, are the following. 1. Following the proposed transaction or other change, will the insurer have sufficient capital relative to the expectations communicated in OSFI's guidelines? 2. Following the proposed transaction or other change, will the insurer have sufficient liquidity relative to the expectations communicated in OSFI's guidelines? And third, does the insurer prudently identify, measure, and manage, or does it have a confidence-inspiring plan to manage the risks associated with a proposed transaction or other change in accordance with the expectations set out in OSFI's guidelines? Now, in addition to these three questions, where applicable, the superintendent considers the national security implications of the proposed change as part of the superintendent's decision. Before examining the factors that the Minister of Finance takes into account in reaching a decision on whether or not to grant an approval, it should be noted that all applications for the Minister's approval under the ICA are filed with OSFI. After a rigorous review of the proposed transaction or other changes' compliance with the ICA, and, if applicable, its impact on the financial position of the insurer or the implications on the risk profile of the insurer, the superintendent makes a recommendation to the minister. In all cases, the minister considers the superintendent's recommendation, but the minister's considerations are not limited to that recommendation. As is the case with applications to create new federally regulated insurers, and as is the case with applications to acquire control of an existing insurer, both of which we'll discuss in later submodules, the ICA sometimes prescribes factors that the minister must consider when coming to a decision. Now, these prescribed factors are not exhaustive, and in all cases, the minister will consider the broad interests of the Canadian financial sector. For example, the minister will consider the impact of the proposed transaction or other change on jobs, on competition, and availability of products and services within the sector. In addition, where applicable, the minister considers national security implications of the proposed change. So to summarize, when you're thinking about superintendent approvals required by the ICA, I suggest that you think about compliance with the ICA and, as a general rule, the financial impact of the transaction or other change on the insurer and the impact on the risk profile of the change. And as a general rule, when you're thinking about ministerial approvals required by the ICA, I would suggest thinking about the overall interests of the Canadian financial sector, in addition to compliance and, if applicable, financial impact and risk profile implications of the change. Now, this concludes this short submodule. Bye for now.